You're listening to the Missionary Perspective Podcast with veteran missionaries Eric Johnson and Joshua Mead. We're glad you could join us. We trust this podcast will be both a blessing and a challenge as we relate topics in world evangelism from a missionary perspective. Now, here's Josh and Eric.
Hey, Josh. Good to see you this morning here from the sunny DR. Josh, I don't know what's going on. I don't believe in climate change, but this climate ain't changing here in the Dominican. It's still hot. It's supposed to be going down. I don't know how things are going for you there in Senegal, but we're glad to be serving the Lord. I just wish he'd turn the ordinal, the stove down a little.
It's been unusually hot here. And even speaking with my grandmother last night back in Michigan, she said this has been the warmest and most beautiful October that she can remember in Michigan. And so, it's been unusual weather these days.
Well, it's sure glad to see you. I know we're going to catch up. It seems like pretty much all of our podcasts lately have been catch-up podcasts because, hey, listeners, listen. It's you're busy. You're busy when you're a missionary. You're doing things, and that's a great thing. We're going to catch up on some fun things we were able to be a part of, things that encouraged our souls, things that were great for the kingdom. But I am thankful to just get back. I was out about a few weeks ago in Lancaster, California, Josh, at the Spiritual Leadership Conference. Now, I know both of us are supported by Lancaster, a wonderful church who has just been one of those beacons for preaching the truth and going after souls. And I actually went to the 2007 Spiritual Leadership Conference, and that was the last time I'd set foot on the campus, West Coast in Lancaster. And, what happened was, and I've always from afar watched, the different conferences and enjoyed the preaching there, but we've just been busy. But when we celebrated the 15th anniversary of our home church here, our church in the Dominican, there's just something kind of came over me in my devotions and praying about some of the next steps in ministry. And I think I found, though I have been to a number of pastor fellowships here in the Dominican, and they've always been very encouraging, I just felt like I needed some time to go be spiritually encouraged. The theme this year was about being courageous in the gospel, and especially in this day and age when there's just so many people who are maybe not taking the right kind of stands for the Word of God and for biblical principles. I felt like it was something worth doing. And my wife, thankfully, she gave me the permission to go. It's a lot to leave behind and take care of everything. But I was able to get on an airplane and fly out there and really enjoy the preaching and the teaching. I got to see some old friends and catch up with them. I got to make a lot of new friends. Josh, I've got a funny story I got to tell you.
Yeah,
I am thankful for the opportunity at Lancaster. Actually, because I'm one of the missionaries they support, they allowed us to stay in one of the young men's dorms, the dorms for the college students. And so on this hallway, there's a number of different men. Some are missionaries, some are laymen in churches around the country, some are preachers. But there's one young man I got to talk to, and he was from a supporting church of yours. And I don't want to say his name yet because I didn't get his permission. But we're talking, and I realized he had recently been at this church that supports you. I said, hey, do you know who Josh Mead is? And he said, oh, yeah, Josh Mead. I love that guy. He's a great missionary. In fact, I listen to his podcast. Me and my friends, we listen to his podcast. It's a great podcast. And my head started getting very large. And I'm like, yeah, isn't that a great podcast? I really like that podcast too. Isn't that other guy pretty good as well? And we got started talking about it. And he's telling me about how he wants to be a missionary, how his friends sit around in college and they listen to this podcast. And so we kind of pull it up and like, that other guy, that's me. And he's like, whoa. He's like, you're right. I know I recognized your voice. And so he spends the next few minutes talking about that. And later on, he's like, man, you're a Baptist celebrity. And we were laughing all week about this. Known by dozens, right? But no, it was real encouragement. We had a number of people come up to us, to me, and talk about how the Lord's been using the podcast. In fact, there was one pastor's wife who says every time she's driving around, she listens to our podcast.
Wow.
I was very encouraged. But that was one of my favorite stories. My head was so large, it was hard to get out of the dorm that afternoon.
I love it. No, that's great. Yeah, maybe you just got a familiar face, that hard to recognize. My ugly mug, you could tell who I am. So no, that's good. I'm so glad you got that opportunity to go out there and just get refreshed that way. It's been a couple of years since I've been out to the leadership conference specifically. But just this past year, I got to travel quite a bit, visit churches. And I always tell people one of the most encouraging words you can hear somebody share with you from a supporting church is how excited they are about what you're currently doing in the ministry, meaning they know what they're following and tracking your ministry in real time. And that's one thing I appreciate about social media is that people
Absolutely.
can stay up to date, praying, currently engaging in the gospel ministry. And it's just exciting to me. And so we've been busy as well. We had a group of 41 medical professionals and then just, everyday church people from different backgrounds. They came with the medical mission outreach, and we had an extremely impactful week, but an intense week. And really, there were things that I wrote down. And I'm thinking, Eric, I'd like to do maybe another podcast in the near future while it's fresh
Sure.
on my mind to break down kind of how to host a medical team, because we've done it twice and there's mistakes we made with both and things we learned, things we improved on, things we'll never do again. And I'll share a little bit of that experience, but I think I'd like to save a lot of it maybe for another podcast where we
I'd
could
like to hear
talk
that.
about that. Because I'll tell you, 100%, if you're a missionary, you need to host a medical outreach. You need to have a team like Medical Mission come out and do an outreach, because the impact it makes it's incalculable. The doors it opens for the gospel. And for us, we have unique challenges in that we have places in our community who people have never encountered a Christian ever of any kind. And so we are planting the gospel in communities among people who just have never interacted. For most of the people where we did this medical outreach, the majority of people who came, we were probably the first Christian people that they ever engaged and encountered with. And the feedback was positive. The community was just blessed to see, they were blessed by the medical care, but they got to see not only our church here in Senegal, but we had a church in Gambia come up, and they got to see some of the other churches help us out with members of other churches in our area. So they saw obviously a bunch of, Americans were there and a few Canadians, but they got to see, there's actually an indigenous church here of the same ethnic group as I am, only they're Christians and not Muslim. And that really was eye-opening for a lot of people. But speaking about celebrity and being recognized, Malik, our pastor, of course, we've talked about it on the podcast before, and I actually just did a podcast episode with another young man, Tabor, and I'll have to share the link on here. I shared it on my personal Facebook page, but we talked a lot about digital outreach and using social media to share the gospel, plant churches. So obviously we have a wide reach, and I have a personal page where I get recognized a lot when I go out different places. But Malik, our lead pastor, Malik Job, he is the face of all of our ministry outreach, gospel videos. And so he gets recognized a lot. So we were setting up in the community, setting up for the project. And a gentleman approached, and he had a big fancy boo-boo on. He must have been a marabou or an imam. He was a religious leader, and he had his prayer beads. He had a Quran in one hand, and he kept looking at Malik. And finally he said, I think I know you. I recognize you from somewhere. And Malik said, maybe from Sudi Yakar. And he handed him one of our cards. And he said, I do teaching online. And he said, that's it. He said, I follow and listen to your teaching online. And so this was a local religious leader in that community who had been for the past who knows how long following our teaching online. And I told Malik, what's exciting about this medical opportunity that we had was now they got to see what we teach and practice. They got to see us not just talking about the love of God and the gospel, but we were implementing it and practicing it. And I'm telling you, there were some big challenges to this week, but it was just an incredible week at the same time. Great impact.
Did he not recognize Dauda Tuba?
Yeah, a lot of people. Yeah, there were a few that did as well, but I won't get into that, But I did what was it? 3 weeks ago, I got recognized at a restaurant, so they gave me a free mousse chocolate mousse cake.
That's the best.
It was really nice. Oh yeah, that's what it's all about. It's about Jesus and free food.
Free food.
Oh yeah.
Well, that is amazing, and that's so true. I was actually 2 days ago. I had the opportunity to go down about an hour away. There's a young man who is seeking to start a church, and we're kind of helping him along. Probably going to become a sending church here in not too long. But as we were kind of canvassing in this new city and helping him with kind of a vision, I was talking to him just kind of exactly what you're talking about. Is that for most of these people, they're never going to have known a Baptist, in many cases, an evangelical Christian, and so your first impressions are so important. Yeah. And if our impression is love, giving out to a community, not taking, not necessarily changing their culture, but understanding, how you can demonstrate the love of Christ. That's so important to breaking down barriers where you can have that first opportunity to share the gospel and show them the love of Christ and then give them the word of Christ.
Absolutely. And that's something like that is key here where we work, because again, we went to a fishing village in our town, but it's across, you got to cross 2 bridges. And it's right on the beach. It's a beautiful location, but it's a very tight-knit fishing village community. There's no churches at all in this entire community. And as far as we gathered, there's been no intentional gospel outreach in this community. And so the needs were great. I read a few follow-up posts of some of the team members that had to come. One of the providers, she's from California, and she just posted afterwards some pictures of her trip. And she was saying that this was probably one of the most difficult countries that she had been to do medical outreach. The challenge is, one, it was hot. Okay. It was unusually hot. And that's one of the things we're changing. We're not going to host a medical team during the hot season again. We'll make sure it's the cool season. But she said, beside the heat, and there were people from Arizona who said, we've never even been in this type of heat. This is ridiculous.
And I was just in Arizona. It was 108.
Yeah. It was worse here this week. And the people on this trip, they really persevered through it and worked through it without complaint. But this woman said, beside the heat being challenging, she had never seen people with this many needs. And there were just, everybody's got high blood pressure because they don't drink enough. Everybody has symptoms of dehydration. Diabetes is a big issue that they don't treat. Parasites is a major thing. And so all these needs, and what was shocking to the team was that so many of the people coming, they've never been to a doctor, because most people have to decide, am I going to feed my children or am I going to get this medicine? They can't afford both. And so just being able to, they were able to reach, I think, about 17 or 1,800 people in the 5 days that they did the outreach. But that impact alone just it opened a door for us to be able to follow up, come back into that community. And we actually have a Christian doctor who attends our church, who is the director of a local clinic in that community. So that's going to open up so many more doors for him to be able to share the gospel with those in the community that come for care and everything. And so, certainly it's one of those areas. If you're a missionary and you're figuring out, man, how can I get an inroad into this village, into this community, man, you need to consider doing a medical outreach. And Erik, I think we'll do a podcast maybe just talking about the steps leading up to it, because it's a little more intensive than maybe a construction trip. There's a lot that goes into a construction team or maybe
Sure. Oh,
hosting a
yeah.
youth group. There's a lot that
Well,
goes
there's
into it.
more outside people who you can't possibly plan for that are just going to
Right.
show up. You're reacting, and
Yes.
whereas in a construction group, it's the guys you have, maybe some construction workers,
Yep.
but you're in your little world. You're allowing the world to come to you, and you have to react to it.
And we made one of the mistakes we made this year because it was a new community. We decided to partner with the local leadership to help us control the crowd outside. And one of the gentlemen, who's one of the local leaders, he just was not. It turned out it was an awful situation, and he ended up getting the final day. They actually the team had to close early because it got out of hand. And maybe I'll share the story later. We won't get too much into it here. But basically, we had to shut down early and call it because it just got too out of hand. And it boiled down to this one gentleman was just being absolutely belligerent and was not respecting our process of bringing patients in. He was skipping people in line, and a lot was going into it. And when I addressed it, I just noticed he's not being reasonable. It's, we've crossed a line here now with just losing control of the crowd, things like that. But then for me, I'm pretty relaxed, but there were stresses, and I want to share this because I want to share this maybe in another podcast too, Eric. I think this last week was some of the stress that I didn't even know I was under, because I actually got my jaw started locking up.
Lockjaw. Okay, lockjaw.
Yeah, and because I guess I carry all my stress in my jaw, and I didn't realize it. And by the last day after the team left, like my jaw was almost locked up, and I was in an incredible amount of pain. And there's a name for it, TMJ or something like that.
Yeah.
So I gotta get that treated, anyways. But there was a lot of stress during the week that I didn't even realize, because I don't manifest stress. I don't really notice it, except it's there, And I think sometimes as missionaries, there's different personalities. People deal with stress different ways. I don't really recognize stress. And I think until my body just wears out, or something like my jaw locks up, and I realize,
Right.
I'm under a lot of stress here. But one of the things during the week, this gentleman, he basically got up in the face of one of our guests, a staff member of the team that was here, and was almost she felt she was being threatened, and it made me very upset. And so I went to another person on our team, one of our Senegalese gentlemen who is older, an elder. And I said, you need to go and address this, because the Bible says that a pastor is not to strike people. And I said, I'm ready to leave the pastorate so I can punch this guy. So you need to go talk to him. And, eventually it was dealt with, but it was, I realized this was the first week, I think, in the 15 years of me being here, when I sat down and evaluated some of what took place this week, that I thought, I get it now. I understand why missionaries leave, why they leave the field, because of the opposition and the stress and the difficulty. Now, it never crossed my mind that I'm going to pack up and go home.
Right.
But it was the first time where my personality is just ignore stress, move on. Let's meet the challenge and do better. If we fail, let's just keep going. And I think God sent me here for a reason. And my Julie is the same. He put us here for a reason as a team, because there are challenges to this country. But it was really this week, watching some of what took place, knowing that, yes, there was an incredible impact made for the gospel, but at the same time, the opposition and the darkness was real. And I realized this week, okay, I can maybe empathize a little more in understanding why sometimes people pack up and go home. And I'm trying to work through some of that, because I want to be able to, okay, how do you psychologically, spiritually, physically and emotionally work through that very real feeling, and then not actually quit, continue on. And so let me ask you this. We didn't have a topic for this podcast. We're just chatting. Have you in your years that you've been working, did you ever reach a point where you're like, I could leave and I'd be good? And you don't have to share if you don't want to, but I mean,
No.
or was there ever a point where it's like, I get it. I get why maybe somebody might pack up and go home.
It's funny. Let me think about that. Maybe not that exact feeling you're thinking, but what I would say is we have experienced, just because the Dominican has had so many missionaries, Josh,
Sure.
and so many of them have left, and we have just been blessed to become friends with many, many of them, sometimes very close friends.
Yeah.
And so in the sense of our personal ministry, I haven't necessarily faced that specific opposition, or I'm just not thinking of it right now. Because I will say there is a part of your life that sometimes, like for instance, we were building this church. There was oppositions, but I wouldn't say they were satanic in nature.
Sure.
They were more red tape and things like that you have to work through. There are times when it comes to sin, there are direct oppositions that I've prayed that if the Lord, not to take people out, but to take people out of the sphere of influence in our fellowship, because they're not having good, but very close people I've been able to fellowship with, and not even say counsel, because we're probably contemporaries. That there is such an opposition spiritually to what we're doing that I feel, and this is kind of parallel to why I went to spiritual leadership conference, though we weren't going through a time of difficulty.
Right.
I also feel like when we hit certain chapters in our lives, we need motivations, we need goals, we need challenges, we need a second wind. And, I think there's part of a molecular thing that's common in men. They call it a midlife crisis, but I don't think it's a crisis when it comes to what I'm talking about, in the sense of, there's sometimes what I call the second act in a missionary or a ministry life, where you don't necessarily do the same thing for 40 years. If you're doing the same thing, you're probably not growing.
Right.
And so for me, there were a lot of things I was praying about. We were praying about camps. We were praying about this. And I can honestly say that's one of the reasons I went out to this leadership conference, was to be around like-minded men, to be encouraged in the word, to have some inspiration spiritually, and some even with innovation. But I can honestly say that, when we're able to reflect on God's goodness and his faithfulness, and we're able to keep our world tight. When I mean our world tight, I mean our relationship with the Lord, our relationship with our wife and our kids, and then on the things that are most necessary when it comes to our ministry. Because both of us, I think, both have visions that are, more that are grander than just, the church we're working in now. But I think the Lord, he wants us to stay close to him, and he will allow difficulties to test us. And I think everybody has different situations, but that realization there is a real realization. I'll give you an example. There's a young man who witnessed, a bunch of young men, one of our missionary friends 9 years ago passing away because he was out in the ocean saving people who were drowning.
Right.
And a number of young people who were kids in the ministry mentally were affected by that. And there were cases where families had to make changes, some ministerial changes, and this was no fault of anyone's. But I could certainly sit back and go, Lord, I don't know why you allowed that. We can't figure that out, but we can certainly understand why people are having these difficulties because of what they faced. And so, sometimes the Lord put these obstacles like this man in front of you, whether it's to have a better design or plan the next time, or I'll give you a perfect example of a silly thing. When we did 2 different ordinations, one time we did ordination with just the strong men in our church and 1 or 2 other pastors we called in. The next time we opened it to all the men in the church. Well, what I didn't realize was there were these 2 men who had just started to come into the men's meeting that weren't believers. And Josh, they showed up drunk, and they showed up asking questions. I'm like, I'm never doing this again. This is the stupidest thing I've ever done. Now we're just going to go back to this select group. And so, who knows why sometimes we face opposition. But I think our closest to the Lord, understanding our calling, and then I think you're probably empathetic like you said, empathetic now to people
Right.
who, for whatever reasons, they have to stop being a missionary. You can sometimes understand when the weight of opposition is so strong. So I know it's kind of rambling, but in a sense, I do understand. Haven't had that exact situation, but I'm certainly empathetic to that.
Well, I think you bring up a good point, and I think just in our discussion here, I think there's two. You come to a crossroad. I think in your midlife, right, where I think what you described, I experienced that probably 2 years ago or so. I think it was right before our furlough, where I really sat down and I just mentally I kept running through my mind, hey, I'm like halfway done here. Like I'm past 40, and ministry wise, am I going to be still doing ministry in the 80s when I'm 80 years old? I don't know where God will guide me when I'm that old, but I'm like halfway done here. What have I accomplished and where am I going? And am I just going to keep doing the same thing? And I think, Eric, you bring up a great point, is that depending on the context of where you're working, there's different challenges, different opposition. And I think it's one of the two things. You reach a point maybe where, like in my situation just this past week, where the opposition, and I do not use it lightly, like you said, I don't
Hmm.
lightly say this is Satan coming against us. I think we use that too
Right.
much.
Hmm.
But I can say, and people gave testimony who came on this group, there's a darkness here. They said that we've never felt
Hmm.
any other place. The only place, like the staff that was on the team, they said the only place we've seen this type of challenge was in Haiti. And I mean, a
Wow.
lot of Haitians are West African in origin,
Sure.
and a lot of the superstitions and things that come along with the challenges come with, from our territory as well. So there's some similarities there in culture. But that being said, I think that you you're either going to come to a point in ministry where the opposition and burden is so great that you are like I can't keep going like this. What is the point? Or you reach the point, as you were saying, like, okay, what's the next step look like? And I think you make a great point. What is the saying? An ounce of prevention is worth a pound of cure. If you can be intentional in getting around other men and influence, like the Spiritual Leadership Conference,
Hmm.
if you're a missionary who's kind of isolated, I would say this, like your situation and our situation, we're probably a little more isolated than maybe you are in fellowship with
Sure.
other
Sure.
missionaries, but you're a veteran missionary who kind of takes a leadership role even among other missionaries, which makes
Hmm.
you isolated by fact of
Hmm.
you're pouring
Exactly.
your life into other people, you're mentoring, and you maybe don't have somebody who's older than you mentoring you. And so there's an isolation, and you can reach a point where you just get stuck in a rut
Hmm.
of never developing and growing. And I think you make a great point. If you're a middle-aged missionary, if you're reaching, that 40, 45-year mark,
I'm
I
past
think you need to decide. Yeah,
it.
exactly. But you need to start formulating, okay, are we going to expand? That was our theme of this last furlough. We're going to take what we've done, which I
Hmm.
believe God has blessed the dynamic of our national church with the mission, how we interact with the
Hmm.
national leadership and church planting. And I think that we're going to try to replicate it and reproduce it over the coming decade. We're going to expand and grow and plant more churches. And whatever that looks like for you in the next decade of how you're going to grow and develop into whatever God leads you to do, um, we need to be intentional in taking those steps. Otherwise, you'll be 50, 60 years old, not really doing anything. You're just kind of spinning your wheels. And I've met some guys who are just kind of like, yeah, I'm just kind of, just sticking by the stuff. And maybe God
Yeah.
doesn't want you to always just stick by the stuff. Maybe He wants you to take your influence and expand it. Does that make sense?
Absolutely. And I think there's always crucial parts in your life. I'll try to say this very briefly. In my life, 9/11 was very crucial.
Mm.
I had just met my wife, who is my wife now, my future. We literally gone on our first date 3 days before 9/11,
Wow.
and the Lord was already working in my heart. I'd gone on a mission trip to India in the summer, and when 9/11 happened, it was like this point when I was working a secular job, I was making good money, but I really didn't knew there was something more out there, and it was like this light bulb moment, like life is fragile. And, I know I can do something. The Lord has enough computer network analysts. He needs more missionaries. That's what the mission trip really showed me. And so now this last 9/11, I've actually lived longer life post 9/11 than I had pre 9/11.
Right.
And I thought about how integral that moment was and making some decisions for the Lord. And then recently, thinking back about COVID, COVID here, we really were sticking by the stuff. I mean, there was a season of life where you had to do that. I mean, every week was emotionally, mentally, and spiritually a war. Literally in our case, our city was shut down and to minister to our people. And then the things slowly open up and they close up and you have to make. And so post COVID, I think once again, it's like, why are we in the slow lane? Let's get in the fast lane for the Lord. Let's not have any fear. Let's be wise. And that's one of the things I'm always encouraged about Lancaster. They're not sitting still. They're going forward. And I love that about them and their encouragement about, looking forward. And so with that in mind, I feel like as missionaries, we should always be looking forward. What's the next thing the Lord wants to do? Don't be afraid of it. You got to count the costs. I'm a slow progression, but I'm trying to pick up some steam. And the last thing I was going to say is as we start getting into the second wind, I might call it, I was able to be there when they honored Dr. Sisk for 70 years of ministry. Dr. Chappell said, we don't have any more. We don't have any more awards to give you. We just wanted to recognize you. And it was so great. And he gets up there. If you haven't seen it, go back, listen to it. It's really great. But, thought about Dr. Sisk. I'm half the age, basically, he is right now. And he's still on airplanes. He was going to come here in the summertime. Yeah. He is out serving the Lord. And you mentioned about, I'm not sure if I'm 80 years old, I'm going to be doing missions. Two men who are kind of like mentors. One man specifically, another man I just saw for the first time in a while. They're 77, they're 79 years old, and they're still at it. And I don't think it's because they don't have any money to retire. And I think in some way or other, as missionaries, we want to be involved in missions. If you love missions, you want to be involved in missions. I want to do it as long as the Lord allows me here on the island. One day I won't be able to.
Right.
And I want to do it somewhere else. And I think there may be, we shouldn't burn out. We have to keep our family with us. But I think there is a fear if we kick it down to lower gear, actually what you end up doing is going to be going in reverse. And that's the last thing I want to do.
Absolutely. Well, that's some great advice. I think this is a very productive discussion, getting back in catching
no
up
direction, just blah, blah, blah.
Yeah. Maybe we'll try to do this at least once a month where we don't have a topic. We just chat and see where it takes us. I like that. But we're gonna try to get some topics here on the docket. Right now here in Senegal, our main two projects we have ahead of us is building projects. So we're going to put up a gymnasium for a sports ministry. We got a church building, administrative building we're putting up, and then a clinic that we're going to start construction on. I just met with the developer of the entire new city that's being developed where it's basically going to be a whole new town where our property is located. And he invited me to meet. He just sold 300 properties to the military, and they're coming out to build housing out there for military. And he wants me to meet the colonel and the general for the military. So I'll be out there and share a little bit of our vision of what we're doing. And so I'm excited about that opportunity to be able to just get some more inroads in with the military even. And who knows, it's always helpful to have connections with people who are in high places. And it's neat how God opens different doors to connect you with people that you could be an influence on for the gospel. And so that, and then we got seminars, our church planting Islamic evangelism seminars. We got one planned in the month of November, and we're excited about that. So those are our two main projects. So I'm going to have a little, even though we're busy every day, we're going to try to, if you're our listener, try to hold us to it. We're going to try to schedule a regular time every week now where we get on and do a podcast so we can close out the year strong with some podcasts. So we have a few topics, I think, Eric, that we'd like to discuss, and we'll try to get on that so we can share with you. So anyways, I don't have much more to add this morning. It was great getting back in touch, and we're going to try to just try to meet weekly here and get some podcasts put out to be a blessing. If you're listening and you haven't subscribed yet, well, what are you waiting for? Go ahead and subscribe.
What's going on?
Share the podcast with a friend, somebody you think it might be a blessing to. And we want to just say thank you for tuning in, listening, and following the podcast. Anytime you have a topic you want us to discuss, send us an email or write it in the comment section. We will definitely take that into consideration. Well, any final words, Eric?
Just keep going strong for the Lord. If you're sensing burnout, you're sensing anxieties, you're experiencing things you're just not sure of, get close to the Lord, be around friends, listen to the good sermons, turn off the phone, turn off the noise, and ask the Lord what's next, because He's telling us. We just sometimes aren't listening very well.
That's right. Well, amen. Well, this is Josh Mead from extremely hot Senegal, West Africa.
And Eric Johnson in the very humid island in the Dominican Republic.
Thanks for tuning in. God bless. Have a great week.